Hey, what's going on, roleplayers? It's the Bard here, and welcome back to the corner. And this is new territory for me. Make a guide on the Hexblade, Pact of the Blade Warlock. Never been asked to make a full guide before, but if you want it, you got it. So this might actually take a while, because I might as well just cover the entire thing, point by point. So we're going to start with the expanded spell list. And right out of the gate, first spell on the list, Shield. And it's a trap. Unless you have access to some low-level slots from some multi-classing, like with Sorcerer or something, Shield isn't going to really give you that much benefit. It pretty much pales in comparison to something like Armour of Agathis, which is not only giving you additional temporary hit points, but it's also dealing retributive damage as well. Worst of all, Shield doesn't give you any additional bonuses for a higher level slot that you cast it in. It's always going to be cast at the minimum level because there is no additional effect. So it's a massive waste of a 4th or even 5th level slot depending on how high your Warlock is. Unless you're going for a very specific kind of build, I wouldn't waste my time with this spell. So Wrathful Smite is only good if you consider the Frightened condition to be worth it. Disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls while the source of its fear is within line of sight can be pretty useful, and of course the creature can't willingly move closer to the source of its fear, which is great I suppose if you can get it onto a big creature. But unfortunately, again, it doesn't improve with spell slot progression, so is it worth it? I don't think so. Let's hope there's something better in second level. Next up is Blur, which gives the attacker disadvantage against you. There are so much better ways to put disadvantage onto a creature. And if I had the choice between Blur and Mirror Image, I would pick Mirror Image every time. Just the fact that it doesn't require any concentration is enough to make it into my top defensive illusions at low level. So I would not waste my time with Blur. So now we've got Branding Smite, and it's the first decent spell in the expanded spell list. The next time you hit a creature with a weapon attack before the spell ends, that's the important bit. It's not a melee weapon attack like the other spells, it's a weapon attack. This means if you have improved pack weapon and you want to use ranged attacks, this spell actually complements it very nicely. If you want to be more of a Warlock sniper, then you can use Eldritch Smite and Wrathful Smite all in the same action. It does burn up a lot of your spell slots, but you can get an enormous amount of dice rolls from that simple combination on its own. Combine that again with things like the Sharpshooter feat for the minus on attack roll plus on damage, and you can be kicking out such high numbers it's unbelievable. So with the bonus to damage from higher level spell slots, and the ability to take away a creature's capacity to turn invisible, it's the first spell on the expanded spell list to make the cut. Blink isn't a bad defensive spell because it's 50-50 whether it will work or not, but at least it doesn't interfere with your actions. But what is really useful is its utility. Because you blink into an unoccupied space 10 feet from where you disappeared, you can use it to subvert certain obstacles. You combine that with, say, something like Ghostly Gaze, and you can actually teleport into rooms you wouldn't normally be able to see into. For all the benefits that Blink gives you, however, there are an equal number of drawbacks. You might not be able to be hit by an enemy creature, but you can't get healed by a friendly spellcaster. You might be able to reappear in a different location on the material plane, but that's if you can even get onto the ethereal in the first place. If you enjoy the excitement of the not knowing, then go for Blink. If you can't stand the tension of having these random dice rolls, then just drop the spell completely. Elemental Weapon. This is my god pick. This is the one that I would choose every single time. So you can choose any of the following: Acid, Cold, Fire, Lightning or Thunder, and for the duration it has a +1 bonus to attack rolls and deals an additional d4 damage of the chosen type when it hits. This is really good. You get up to 5th level slots as a Warlock, so you can actually get a +2 weapon with 2d4 additional damage. There are creatures that are going to be vulnerable to certain magic and damage effects, so this is a brilliant spell. Not only that, it gives you a +1 on your attack rolls. It counts as a magical weapon then, so it will overcome certain things like resistance, and it will also improve the chances you have to hit. If you combine that also with something like Great Weapon Master, it can be really good for increasing your damage even further, especially if you're going with something like a polearm, like a glaive or a halberd. You can get ridiculous damage, and we'll cover that later. Elemental Weapon is probably, I think, the best spell in the expanded spell list for the Hexblade. And if you're not using it and you're not taking it, then there is something seriously wrong with you. So level 4 now in Phantasmal Killer. If you can find a decent way of getting the enemy to have disadvantage on their saving throws, then 4d10 damage per round is nothing to be sniffed at, especially when all it requires is concentration and you can continue using your actions from round to round. More melee swings, more non-concentration casts, whatever you want. It's a good way of compounding damage, so it's one that's worth considering. Staggering Smite, another spell that doesn't improve with slot progression. The damage is okay, but it really isn't good enough for a 4th level slot. Disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks is also not worth your concentration at this level. At 5th level we have Banishing Smite, and Banishing Smite is actually pretty damn good. Again, it's one of those spells that doesn't require a melee attack, it just requires an attack roll. Combine this with improved pack weapon and a ranged attack and it's just so much fun. Just sniper the creature at range and it just winks out of existence. Then when you're actually ready to deal with it, everyone can crowd around the area where it left, and then as soon as you let go of concentration or the spell ends, it comes back into play, and everyone's just surrounding it, getting advantage from all sides. Too much fun, and loads of damage on top of that. 5d10, that's an enormous amount of force damage, so again, you can use it on things that are on different planes, like the Ethereal, because it's force-based damage. Yep, I would definitely say Banishing Smite deserves to be a spell that should be used regularly, if not all the time. Cone of Cold is just a great AoE to have. I wouldn't really say it fits the Hexblade theme that well, but it's just so good to have a 60-foot cone that you can use to damage an enormous amount of creatures in one go. Combine this with something like Elemental Adept, and you can use that then not just for your Cone of Cold, but also for your Armour of Agathis, also for your Elemental Weapon if you cast it as a Frost spell. So really consistent damage, being able to overcome resistances, yeah, it's just a no-brainer. Put them all together and you've got yourself a serious, decent Cryomancer. So your expanded spell list is a little bit hit and miss. There are a few turkeys in there, but there are some really good spells in there as well. Ultimately, your spell choices should complement the things that you want to do. So go Elemental Weapon for weapon attacks, go for Blink if you want utility in defense, go for Cone of Cold if you want to be more caster-based. This is simply an expanded spell list, however, so don't forget about your core spell list. Some of the spells you have complement your Hexblade abilities so well, and you need to have a good mix. Things like Invisibility, things like Whole Person, things like Armour of Agathis. Don't neglect them. So your Curse makes the Hexblade one of the best 1-level dips in the game. Improved critical hits, improved damage rolls, the ability to regain hit points, and of course it works with things like Maddening Hex and Relentless Hex because it's still a curse at the end of the day as well. So it's an amazing ability if you are just a dabbler or if you are a dedicated warlock. This is obviously going to be the cornerstone that you'll need in order to use your Armour of Hexes and your Master of Hexes special ability at later levels. Both Armour of Hexes and Master of Hexes are just things that happen, so you'd never have to worry about them. You're always going to get that chance against a cursed target to avoid some of its attacks, and with the Master of Hexes you can always move it around after you've finished dealing with one creature. There are so many things that your Hexblade's curse is useful for. You rely on it for your damage output, you rely on it for healing, you rely on it for defense, you rely on it for Maddening Hex, you rely on it for Relentless Hex. You must be casting this thing every single fight if you have the opportunity to do so. Even though Hexblade's curse is great for dealing extra damage when you combine it with certain invocations, because it's giving you those extra bonuses, you don't necessarily have to continue to go down that route. You can start to experiment with other things, like Mask of Many Faces, or Master of Myriad Forms, or Misty Visions. If you want to be more than just a combat character, then Hexblade's Curse allows you that flexibility because you're still being able to improve your damage and keep up with the rest of the party, whilst being able to experiment with different spells and invocations. And because Hexblade's Curse works with melee attacks, with ranged attacks, with spell attacks, it's one of the most versatile damage buffs a warlock could want. So Hex Warrior is one of those unusual abilities. It gives you proficiency with martial weapons, it gives you proficiency with shields, it gives you proficiency with medium armor. But Pact of the Blade allows you to use whatever weapon that is your pact weapon, regardless of whether it's martial or not. So why would you need such an ability? Well, the obvious reason would be if you don't want to go Pact of the Blade. And I made this point before in a different video. You don't have to go Blade Pact to be a Hexblade. In fact, there are many benefits of not being a Pact of the Blade. So as I said before, you don't necessarily have to be a melee character to be a Hexblade. You could be a ranged attack character, or you could be a spell-based character, but still use things like Hexblade's Curse to get really improved damage. And of course, medium armor proficiency and shield proficiency are just really good for keeping your defenses up. A perfect example is if you went, say, Pact to the Chain. Now you've got your medium armor, you've got a shield, so your defenses are pretty high, but if you went Pact to the Chain, you'd then be able to have something like Gift of the Ever-Living Ones. Every time you receive healing then, you're going to get the maximum amount possible, which is always good. Combine that with the fact that your Hexblade's Curse gives you hit points when you kill something. Again, you'll get more and more hit points, so you would make an amazing damage sponge. You'd be really hard to put down. As a Pact to the Chain Hexblade, a 1 level dip into Fighter could be amazing. You'd get the heavy armor proficiency and you'd get the second wind ability. But a Gift of the Ever-Living Ones would cause your second wind to always give you the maximum amount of hit points, so you would always get 10 plus your fighter level. If you do decide to go Pact to the Blade, however, then it's the secondary ability of Hex Warrior that you really want. By using your Charisma modifier instead of your Strength and Dexterity, you would then be able to get bonus on attack rolls and damage rolls. This is probably the best use of this ability because you want it with a singular weapon, something like a glaive or a halberd, something that you can use that polearm master feat with, and you just get so many decent bonuses. It also means then that you don't need to concentrate on having a high strength. You can have the bare minimum of strength you need to get something like Great Weapon Master and still just concentrate fully on your charisma. By getting your charisma as high as you can, it makes invocations like Life Drinker so much more important, especially if you're combining it with something like a polearm and polearm master, because then you'll get 3 instances of that additional damage. 2 for your normal packed weapon attacks and an additional 1 for the bonus action attack that you can get as well. So it just stacks and stacks and stacks. Combine all that with your Hexblade's Curse as well, and you're just racking up damage from round to round. So the last thing to cover for the Hexblade is the Accursed Specter. When it appears, it gains temporary hit points equal to half your Warlock level. It takes its own turns. It obeys your commands, but it also gets a bonus on its attack roll equal to your Charisma modifier. Now this thing will last until your next long rest, so as soon as you get one, you've got it all day, which is pretty useful. However, they're not the best of creatures. They are okay on the attack, but they're just not amazing. One thing they are useful for, however, is sponging damage. So they're great to put between you and something else. Another great thing they're useful for is for gaining advantage if you're in a single fight scenario. So if you can get your Accursed Spectre to be on the flank, then at least you're going to get advantage all the time as well. Your Accursed Spectre is also pretty useful if you're willing to put time and effort into it. What I mean is if you're willing to sacrifice some of your own development in order to improve your Spectre. The way you would do this is by taking certain abilities like Battle Master or Valor Bard. You could use maneuvers like Commander Strike to give your Spectre another attack. You could use Rally to up its temporary hit points. If you were using a reach weapon, you could maneuver it in front of an enemy so that you can use it as a damage wall, or behind the enemy so that you can use it as a point of advantage. If you wanted to make use of the Spectre for a long duration, high level spells like Negative Energy Flood can give it a massive well of temporary hit points, allowing it to continue to fight for you for many combats within a day. But as I said before, there's always got to be some kind of investment. You're either losing out on spells per day, or you might have to look at going into some varying different levels of other classes. So if you really want to make your Accursed Spectre work, you're going to have to pay the price in order to do so. So I think this is going to be one of 2 parts, because I've covered everything that I want to cover in regards to the Hexblade's mechanics, but I really want to showcase some of the potential builds that you can do with it and some of the different fighting styles that you can use the class and the patron for. So I think it's going to end up being a 2-parter. Anyway, if you like this kind of video, be sure to leave a like. If you have something to say, make sure you leave a comment. And if you're not subscribed already, why not consider hitting that subscribe button and join our little community as well. And with that being said, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.